Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here in this symposium and with these colleagues who I consider most of them friends because we've been well, some of them I know from a longer time. The other ones will hopefully become friends. In the order of appearance, Michelle Riedlinger from Australia, David Kirby from United States, Martin Bauer, UK, Xuan Liu from China, and Priscilla van Even from Belgium. We will have a first round of short speeches, and then we will have another round of comments, and I don't know, maybe there will be time for comments or questions from the audience. Our topic is a very broad, interesting topic, building science into creative cultures, and maybe also vice versa, building creative culture into science. So we will start with Michelle.
Hello. Thanks, Massi. I think I'm going to talk about creative cultures, bringing it into science through the framing of generative AI. And I've had some chats with Priscilla, so I'm glad she's going last, because I think she'll bring some connections together. Yeah, I think the quality and aesthetics of science communication in the age of generative AI technologies needs to be considered in light of what it means to be authentic, what it means to make an authentic contribution. And I think if I was to ask all of you what authentic science communication would look like, Bernard summed it up, opened our eyes to the world. I think it means very different things. So for some science communicators, authenticity can mean content authenticity, accuracy, open to limitations or uncertainties, or it can mean emotional resonance, some sense of being authentic to your community. Or it can mean, yes, social and cultural connection. And for creative cultures, in terms of bringing creative cultures into science, writers and artists, authenticity can have very different meanings. So it can mean original or created with integrity, thought, or a unique personal expression, so avoiding imitating others. And so I think one of the biggest issues for science, creative cultures into science, is that authenticity is a cultural expectation. We have an understanding of what it is authentic within our own communities, which is something that generative AI at the moment cannot emulate. It doesn't have that contextual understanding. So just because we have the opportunity to be creative with generative AI technologies doesn't mean we should necessarily be doing it without a lot of thought about what it means for our communities. I think about Goyan's avatar. We've been doing a project with journalists looking at news media and what people do, and people at the moment don't want to see news avatars. That might change as time goes on, but I think it's really important for us to understand in our communities what's acceptable and what's not.
David, we heard about uncertainty in Oppenheimer. You have been a pioneer in studying science in cinema and how science has used cinema also to produce knowledge.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to talk about, well, I also want to sort of reiterate the idea we can talk about bringing science into creative cultures, but that certainly creativity, it goes the other way, bringing creativity into scientific cultures and science communication in general. And I thought it was great in the last panel, Don Hung brought up the book, Science, Communication, and Social Context. I have a chapter in there that's literally about what I call boundary spanners, individuals who live both within the world of science and in the world of entertainment. That's sort of what I want to talk about here a little bit, is the idea of having science become a part of entertainment culture and being useful. Because science and entertainment, they really represent, two of the most powerful cultural institutions that humans have developed to understand and explore their worlds, right? But many people believe that these two cultural arenas are incompatible, right? They're separate. They can't be joined. And even many entertainment producers think that science is too constraining to be good for storytelling. Right? Science is the ultimate in objectivity. Storytelling is about emotions and feelings. Right? There's this idea that science plus fiction equals friction. But I've done a lot of work on this topic, a lot of research into the ways in which filmmakers and TV producers and computer game makers use science in their storytelling. And what I found is that science can be built into the creative culture of entertainment storytelling. And not only can science and storytelling exist, they can really thrive. One of the sort of points I want to make is that I'm not talking about stories about science, right? There are thousands of examples of stories about science. I'm talking about the ways in which entertainment storytellers can use science in their storytelling, right? So they can use science to tell their stories in a more meaningful way, right? So that science becomes a part of that creative culture by helping them tell stories about shared human experiences, right? Self-discovery, redemption, the power of family, all the types of stories that people can tell. Just in general, science can help enhance a lot of those stories. So what that means is screenwriters can, use our interactions with science and our relationship to science as a means to explore themes and topics and ideas that might have nothing to do with science. Right? So science provides a means by which stories can better explore those types of themes in meaningful ways. And I want to talk about just one sort of example. We saw the example of Oppenheimer earlier. It was a great sort of way to bring in sort of science and entertainment. But I'm going to talk about a film that came out a couple of years ago that many of you hopefully saw but may know about, called Hidden Figures. Right? Hidden Figures is the story about the experiences of being an African American woman in America, in the South, in the 1960s. Right? Notice in my summary of that movie, I didn't mention 3 women who work at NASA, right? Because NASA is just the setting for the story. The story really is about 3 African American women living in the South, in the American South in the 1960s. And that setting of NASA just provides a much better way to tell that story, right? It provides a really useful way to enhance the gender and racial discrimination that those 3 characters faced, right? Because science is supposed to be objective. Science is supposed to be open to anybody who has the intellectual capacity to do science. So if that were true, these women should have been given jobs at NASA right away and should have moved to the top of the ladder right away, right? But they didn't, because South in America in the 1960s, heavily discriminatory against African American women, right? So that scientific setting allowed them to tell the story they really wanted to tell about gender and racial discrimination in a much deeper and more relevant fashion. So I'm just going to sort of stop there and say that hopefully gives us an example of how we can use science, entertainment culture can use science to tell stories that aren't just about science.
Thank you, Dave. Martin, I think culture is a term with many different meanings, also in different languages, and I understand you will tackle a meaning of culture that is culture in terms of relationship with science and attitudes to science.
Yeah, does this work? Okay. Yeah, difficult to say something in a very brief time. I'd like to talk about, maybe link up to the previous session, which reviewed a little bit the community building in and around PCST, which is a kind of an important form of communication, to build a community, to build a common ground on which to talk. And one of the key fascination, which always fascinated me in PCST, is this kind of community of practitioners and academic researchers. And this is sometimes a bit a tension, because practitioners, they like what they do, and they like to do things better, and they like to know what works, and they like to mobilize empirical research for this question. But then there are other kind of researchers and academics who worry about the better. What is it really what we want to do better, and what is it what we are doing? And one of the crucial things which this community has been following is, for example, the measurement of effects of communication. And one of the key ones is literacy. And I'm increasingly stumbling a bit if this is the only thing we want to achieve. Is science communication really in the business of creating literacy as a kind of a single performance measure of outcome? And I think in PCST we always struggled with that a bit, and we tried to open up to other forms of possible outcomes. And one alternative, and this is a bit conceptual, is attitudes. Now, would they have to ask the question, what's the difference between achieving literacy or attitudes? And how would one do that? One possibility would be that by saying literacy is in principle something like in a school is a performance that you can measure and think can be better or worse, and then you fail the exam. And the literacy in principle extends this to the whole society and into adulthood. You can still fail the exam of science literacy when you're 45. With the attitude, that's not so simple. Because with the attitude, we are celebrating a kind of a formation of character and the strength of a positioning that you can take that might be informed by science. And there it's difficult to make it into a kind of a test where you can fail the attitude test. So I think the attitude should in principle, or is in principle in many places around the world, a target or a goal of science communication as well. So I think the point I'm trying to make is, in principle, if we are thinking of science culture, we probably have to celebrate a multitude of aims. Literacy is not to be neglected. Attitude is probably even more important, because I couldn't imagine somebody wanting to become literate without having first an attitude, a hunger for knowledge, and only then. And then, even when you then acquire literacy, is the attitude that develops this further. So there is no literacy without an attitude. So in other words, it's really prior. And I think we need to keep this in mind. And we could develop this further. People have developed other kind of ideas. Scientific citizenship, nearly a hierarchy from literacy to attitude to citizenship. Now, it's even more difficult to fail a citizenship test. Also, some countries try to introduce that, but only for the passport version, not as a kind of a really serious thing. So I think that's the kind of thing which, as PCST, in my view, has always encouraged, and we should continue to do that. And that reminds me, Dong Hong mentioned kindly a discussion we had in Seoul, and I never forget Dong Hong introducing this great metaphor that we have to cook things, maybe noodles or whatever, or rice, but we have to develop different sauces. And for me, the sauce is a little bit the kind of the different outcomes that we want to achieve. It might be rice and noodles, continues to be that, but we have to develop different types of sauces, and that PCST has a role to play. So literacy, attitudes, citizenship, different kind of goals we need to consider, and also consider the measure if we want to have global resonance, not just globalizing a local model. This is the old problem of PCST, taking a local model and thinking it's the one best way everybody needs to follow. No, we need to have something that can be globalized and nevertheless allows to use the same language. That in principle is a bit of a research challenge, which PCST has a role to play to continue in the future. It's a bit longer than expected. Sure.
So, Xuan, how do you build science into creative cultures in China?
Yeah, it's quite a broad topic for me, and especially for me, and I was away from like pure communication study for a while, but I really have some thoughts to share on this stage, and feel very good to come back to this stage again. And the culture issue used to be far away from science and technology. I should say science now we are talking about is more about science and technology, because science and technology merging together cannot tell each other very clearly. And we can go back to the C.P. Snow's two-culture tension back to 100 years, and there is a tension between the scientists and the sociology and the philosophy and the humanity researchers. So the culture issue was raised now more and more often, not only in the creative culture field or culture industry, but also in the science and technology policy field. That's why it's very so important. There is a belief that only a good or friendly, let's say innovations friendly environment can provide a long-term environment and fund for the science and innovation strategy. This is the belief, common belief by the, I think, not only Chinese government, but also the other countries. So in that case, culture, the merging the two sides, the science and the social society, the public, is a very crucial issue. And for me to contribute to this topic, I would like to talk from two directions. Why science should learn or input some thoughts and opinions from the sociology and the philosophy and the humanity, let's say, culture field. Because when we talk about the new emerging technology, like AI, like in neuroscience, we can find a lot of uncertainty. And we have a keynote about talk about the uncertainty that new technology brings to us. We cannot tell which can infect the human well-beings in future. So we now need to input philosophy, sociology, and even psychology to talk along with the scientists what we're gonna face in the future, in the uncertain future. This is the one direction that science and technology needs the sociology, the social science to input important guidance, let's say, to keep the direction. Let's say now is the most buzzword is for human well-being for the future. Yes, I think this is the one direction. On the other hand, the culture industry, the content production field also need science and technology to make, like David mentioned, that we apply a lot of new technology to make our beautiful pictures, like most hot words like AIGC applied in the culture field, culture production field. But when we are enjoying this kind of new technology, the convenience they bring to us, we also need to realize that this kind of machine thoughts could invent, the totally different ideology system or symbolic system, totally different away from human beings. So we should have the cautious that we can tell, it's not what we want, or whether humans should be in monitoring for this kind of contents. I think this is a challenge that for all the science communicators and the science communications practice professionals. I think this is very crucial. From this direction, we also need, in one word, the integration from science and technology and the culture field. This is what I want to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Priscilla, yesterday you used a game also to get people to think critically about science communication. How do we relate creative culture and science communication from your point of view?
Okay, so I would like to start by discussing how not science being built into creative cultures, but creative cultures being built in science can happen in 3 layers in the scientific endeavor. In the first case, and this is, in my opinion, the oldest one, is that we study art and creative cultures. We see this in psychology, in perception studies, in art history, in philosophy. Another layer is that we now, and especially in health sciences, are engaging in our methodological approaches with art. We see more and more people exploring arts-based research as a means of participatory connection. This is a very useful mean when working with people, because not everybody is able to express him or herself really well. And an example I can give, I worked with young children in museums, and they had to work on enhancing their visual literacy skills, and we wanted them to develop tools for their peers. Now, for children, it would be very difficult to explain and talk about what they think is very important, how they need it. So we gave them crafting materials to develop some machines. And by developing and making these machines in a very creative way, they could easily describe what the machine did and how it worked. And this was a great way for us to study what was actually needed. And a third layer in the scientific endeavor is in the final part of the research, and this is in the science communication phase, where we think of interactive and creative formats to engage people. These days, scientists are more and more looking into videos, blogs, interactive formats in exhibitions. So this is a third layer of these kind of interactions. Now, why is this important? Well, I think on the one hand, science also has its limits, because science is a very descriptive way of approaching things and of going on with knowledge. Metaphorical knowledge can be very helpful, and as, for example, I explained with the methodology we did with developing the proto tools, it helps really to sometimes visualize things. Some things we just cannot easily express in words. And on the other hand, I think it's also important to build a bridge between science and the public. And I think this is, in our times now, something that's a hot topic. But in my opinion, this is actually a reorientation. And I connect this with 2 historical perspectives on the practice of science communication. On the one hand, what is very dominant these days is that we associate science communication and science with something very modern. And we locate it with the development of the scientific methods, and we connect it with experts and scientists. But you could also have a different perspective where you say science and science communication is actually a very ancient practice. And when we look, for example, at botanical drawings, logbooks of medicinal herbs. Even if we think of cave paintings, we could say maybe this is an anthropology of the past where people documented their lifestyles. So this is a very different way of thinking of science communication, and in this one it's actually very cultural, civic, and also very much connected with the arts and with artistic and craftsmanship. Now, in my research, one of my main attention points as a philosopher and communication scientist working in human-computer interactions is that these interactions have to be meaningful. Now, in science communication, I notice that there's very often a focus on effective strategies and approaches. And in these approaches, you have a targeted audience and you have certain goals. This is very measurable. This is also much easier to describe and to set out. If I say meaningful, this is, well, a bit of a buzzword, but it's also a much more complex concept. Now, a while ago, I had to give a lecture on meaningful interactions. And when I had to talk about it for 30 minutes, I really experienced how difficult it is to talk about what makes something meaningful. So I actually, after some very long consideration, took a sort of a yin-yang approach where I start approaching it from its absence. So instead of thinking what makes something meaningful, I started thinking what makes something meaningless, or what makes it the absence of meaning. And this is something much more tangible. And I will give you an example. For example, if we think of museums, they more and more are interested in using technologies, especially also immersive technologies. But very often they are interested in these kind of technologies to enhance visitor experience and to attract more and more people to the museum, which of course is a legit thing to do. Now, for example, in the museum study I did, we also worked with children with technology. But what did we see? They used some iPads, and with the iPads they were able to study more and more the details in paintings. So they learned important visual literacy skill is to look at the details of things. They were also very much engaged. They thought it was very fun. So if you would say that the strategy was effective, yes, it was. But was it meaningful? Well, I would say I didn't experience it as meaningful because the children, they didn't even look at the paintings or the art anymore. They just looked at the iPad. So why would you have to go to a museum? You can actually do this at home. And then I give an example of something I think it was used in a very meaningful way. I also work as a museum guide. And some art, well, for conservators and curators, there's always this very difficult challenge. On the one hand, you want to present artifacts the way they were, in their ancient state, but because of time, these things have also altered. For example, in a musical instrument museum, we have an ancient Egypt harp, but it doesn't have its strings anymore, and the leather also has gone over time. And another example are we have like very nice Chinese statues, also in a museum in Brussels, but as we all know, Chinese culture is very colorful, but these colors have faded over time. So when people visit these artifacts, they feel a very strong connection because they're like, wow, this is 3,000 years old. That's amazing. And you feel like a very strong connection with the past. But here, immersive technologies can be very helpful because you can keep the artifact in the ancient way it is and have a connection with something that is so old. But at the same time, you can see it in its original function or with its original colors. So I think this is a very meaningful use of immersive technology.
Thank you. Now, can I spark the next round of comments with not a critical but a provocative question? Can science, and I think we can also apply to science communication, can still be creative in our time? Because yesterday with Professor Xuan Liu, we told you, for those who managed to hear the story of Newton, Newton, he could study whatever he wanted, driven by his own curiosity. The greatest scientist of the 19th century, Darwin, he never had a salary. He could afford to focus on his studies because he was from a wealthy family. Albert Einstein, in his early years, when they asked him about his physics laboratory, he would open his drawer at the patent office in Bern. This is my laboratory. This is my office. Now, today we are talking about 6 million professional researchers in the world. So science has transitioned from a vocation, as we say, to a profession. And the same, as we heard in the roundtable before, has happened with science communication. And obviously it's a good thing that we have moved to a happy few band of brothers, as Shakespeare put it, to a nice community of professionals. But can we still keep, or can we reframe the creative spirit? Yes, whoever wants to start.
Well, I guess I'll start and say that certainly creative cultures can be within science communication. We had an example yesterday with yourself at Goyan reciting some poetry in the garden at night, right? That was a very creative way to communicate aspects of science. Before moving to sunny California, I was in Manchester University for 15 years. And one of the things about the UK is lots of science festivals, right? Science festivals everywhere. That's nothing but creative ways to communicate science. So I think definitely the creative culture of science communication is alive and well.
I just say that new technology is bringing new opportunities for creativity that we don't even realise that we've been very adaptive. But I'd also say that I'm hearing from researchers that these generative AI technologies are perhaps giving people more time to be creative, that they can go on longer walks to think about things. But in my experience, technology hasn't brought us that. It's just brought us more oversight and administration. So I'd say we have to be very careful that we maintain the opportunity to stay creative rather than seeing this as a way to become even more uber productive. We're all doing too much, by the way. Stop working so hard.
Sorry, yeah. Comparing to the creative spirit, actually at present in China, there is a very more and more often we mention the word like scientist spirit. And science spirit and creative spirit, I think the most factor I can find in both. They share the common components, if I can say. I think it's the value, that I can find some value between the science spirit and the creative spirit. It's easy to find, like, pursue the new things, and for open mind, and for fairness. I think from creative, no matter it's from creative art, or creative from poets, or creative from science and technology, we share the same values and patterns of doing things. I think there are some components in common. And when we talk about the spirit of scientists in China, this is a very hard word now. When we're doing, like Martin said, the only end is not the scientific literacy at the moment. That the attitude and the values and what people solve is very important to not to the government, but also to the society. So in that case, how to tell the story about, how to communicating, and to convey the spirit of scientists is a key challenges to the practitioners in science museum and science center. So we, in classic way, let's say, traditional way, we use the small function machines to illustrate the knowledge and to the function of the science and technology, the chemistry merge. But now we are thinking about how to convey the values of science and technology professionals. They are doing this kind of job. And I would like to share a case that in China, just close to the Science Museum, which you are very familiar to in the Beijing, a Chinese Science and Technology Museum Center. And there is a brand new National Science Museum. It's about Scientists Museum of China. So I heard that it's the first one that named like a Scientist Museum in other countries. So this is a totally brand new museum. It's displaying the real materials from the scientists, but not that long time ago, but it's a recent 100 years. So I think it's a way, it's a model to convey the scientist story to the public. But maybe the new creative industry give us a new response to this kind of solution, to convey the spirit to the public and share more with the lay public the spirit and the values of science and technology. I think this is the new case I can share here.
I think that creativity is something very personal. And I think very often we even look way too far. For me, creativity is not following templates and frameworks, but trying to see the templates and the frameworks and do something differently with them. And in these days, with a lot of technologies, we're really thinking very big, but we can also look very small. And to give an example, a while ago, I had to make a poster. And very often these posters, they are intended for documentation. That's how we are acquainted with them, that's how we are used to using them. But then I thought, well, it's a bit of a shame, I can put research results on the poster, but what will people actually do with it and how will they implement it? So I took the approach a bit differently, and instead of just putting research findings on there, I made the poster as something to initiate discussions and reflection. So next to the research findings, I encouraged people to take some post-its and to think of how they would implement these research findings in their specific settings and with whom they should discuss it. So I think even in very traditional formats or things we are used to, we can still be very creative and find new ways of using them.
Yeah, you put a sharp challenge here. I would say there's very little space for creativity. The more we celebrate creativity, the less there seems to be. I speak as a university teacher, and one despairs about this. If I think back to primary school, there might have been creativity on Wednesday afternoon between 4 and 5. And a secondary school, you might have extended between 3 to 5. But then one had the impression when you go to university, that's the moment of creativity. And it probably isn't anymore. And then it was postdoc must be the moment of creativity. No, it isn't. People want to find out, how can I go through the exam? Not how can I develop new ideas. And when the postdoc needs to find out, how can I produce 1 paper, 2 papers, or 3 papers in 3 years, otherwise I can't anywhere. So the creativity, one has to ask the question, who is allowed to be creative these days? And there might be a few places where creativity might still flourish. In science communication, I sometimes have the hope that when scientists pair up with artists or something that's more arty-farty, I call it, on the arty side, something fascinating can happen. We made an experiment at the LSE a few years ago. It didn't survive, sadly. So we paired up PhD students with art students every year with a moderation effect, a kind of a speed dating. So a doctoral student met an art student, and extraordinary stuff emerged out of that. A simple cross-tabulation, 5-6 percentage figures, suddenly became a short animated movie. And this has an enormous effect back on those who create the cross-tabulation. So science communication clearly can mobilize art, but it has to be careful not to instrumentalizing it entirely, because the artist also requires autonomy. The other place where I think creativity happens, I recently had the occasion to go to an art school, end of year, art school. And I have the impression, I'm still shocked what I saw there. So there are art students spend a year to do something, and what I saw was extraordinarily crazy. It was extraordinarily, sometimes banal. But that was my first impression. I'm still thinking about it. And what looked like banal was actually not banal. Because what is taught the students to stand up for something that is unheard of, unseen, and unthinkable. And that is exactly where creativity lies. So we have to ask the question, who is allowed to be creative these days? I think science is not the place, unfortunately. And this, we have to think carefully about that in the future.
I mean, one possible answer, I mean, in my experience with scientists, for example, some Nobel scientists have the freedom of creativity because they don't have anything to demonstrate. So, for example, some of them say, what does it mean to be a Nobel? Every door is open to you. You want to meet the president, you want to work with artists. So at that level might be. Also what you were saying reminded me of the fact that this is why we are here, that PCST is not just an academic meeting, it's not just a practitioner meeting, but it's also a cross-contamination, and this keeps it alive and creative, And another thing.
Can we call it a cross-fertilisation rather than a cross-contamination?
Oh, okay, contamination in a positive sense. In a
Excellent.
positive
Just
sense.
clarifying.
Cross-fertilization. And also, we've been talking about museums. Some of you might be familiar with the science gallery model. This is similar to what you were referring to. The science gallery started in Dublin as a museum without a collection. Just temporary exhibition organized in collaboration by scientists and artists on an interdisciplinary theme, for example, blood or sound. And it was a very interesting model, and it has developed and been exported also to other countries. Any other comment? Yes.
I was just going to follow up and challenge a little bit about the idea that science can't be creative. I think if you focus on science-art collaborations only, then maybe, yeah, you've got this worry about can they be artistic enough. But if we think about creativity outside of just art, I mean, I don't know how many people have MSc programs in science communication, but the one we ran at Manchester, all of those students were creative, right, when they went out into the world. And they weren't going to be creating great art, but they created games, and they created new ways of trying to communicate art. So I think creativity is there, and I think, yeah, the art science, the bio-art, that sort of stuff can become a little bit stale, I think, at times. And I think if we just think about science communication in the broader context of science communicators, then it can be very creative.
And I think you hit it on the head about instrumentalising art into science. I think that's what some of the new technologies, it's an easy trap to fall into, and you lose the meaning. So the fundamental, who are you doing this for? What will it mean for them? How do we keep this meaningful?
Anyone else from the panel, or can we take a couple of questions or comments? Yes? I think we need a microphone. Microphone, or you can use this one. This one?
Yeah, it's just a brief comment and also a question. So our theme here is across culture, but all of you are more talking about the science creative culture. So do you think when we're talking about the science creativism, is there a cultural issue? Different culture may define different things as creative. So any of you, maybe, I know time is short, so a quick comment. Thank you.
I guess I'll say a little bit. I mean, in terms of the work I did about this boundary spanner thing, it looked at the notion of work culture as being something where in the entertainment industry and in science, the cultures were different, so you had to learn what the different cultures were in order to be successful in both of them. But I think you're right, if we take it into a larger thing, yeah, creativity is going to mean something different to different culture, to scientists versus someone in another profession.
Yeah, I'd say the work that we're doing with journalists, and we looked at all the ways in which they're using creative technologies in their work, and then we've gone out and asked people in news consumers, what would you want? What? These are all things they're doing already, by the way, but things like putting a body on a head, you've got a head, very, very, no, we don't do that. Creating a script using Gen AI totally don't want to see that. But these are things that are happening in news organisations already. So I think in our field, in science communication, in our context, I guess I'm seeing how we really need to think through who our communities are and what they find acceptable in creative uses of technology for science communication, because I think we don't really know, and it's changing.
I think the question is interesting also in historical terms, because the way the concept we have today of individual creativity, I think is quite a recent one, and probably also rather local. probably started in Europe sometime, but in many periods, for example, to do, for example, in classical art, Renaissance art, to be a good artist meant to be able to copy, you know, the classical style, the other models, and originality was not as praised as we think of it. And this relates to what I was saying before, that science in the beginning was more free to be creative, much more than art, because we consider art to be a free creative activity, but at the time it was largely on commission by the political power. Scientists were more free because nobody understood what they were doing. It was a new thing. Any other question? Oh, sorry, Martin.
Can I just add something to this comment? Historically, I was always fascinated by Benoit Godin, I think his Canadian colleague, who reconstructed the idea of innovation. And the story over the last 300 years is that innovation has moved from a death sentence to a heroship. And you can read that in Shakespeare. I recently went to see Coriolanus, and there Coriolanus is accused to be a traitor. Why? Because he's an innovator. Now I couldn't hear that. I had to I had to check it out. It's true. You can see it. He was a traitor because he's an innovator. So I think the problem with creativity, it frictions with something else, which is tradition, which is the taken for granted, and what we all live and need to live. And I think that is that's why the question comes up: who is allowed to be creative? And the space seems to be very limited. We need to open the space for creativity. And that means allow for friction with what is there, tradition, norms, and so on. That's what the art students do for a year. They break with anything, do crazy stuff, and one wonders about that. Yeah.
I guess we've got to be, I'm thinking in the AI space, we've got to be prepared for a lot of AI slop out in the world before we settle on appropriate uses or effective uses. And maybe that's something we have to, as a community, understand and bear with. I think remember when everybody was saying what they had for breakfast on their social media early on? I think we're going to see that moment for these new technologies. A lot of experimentation and maybe a lot of creative mistakes, But what are mistakes in creative contexts?
I also want to tap into the cross-cultural that you mentioned, because we have a very Eurocentric approach in science communication, because science is, well, in our dominant perspective, very modern and Eurocentric. I think it is also a challenge of these days to learn from other cultures how they have disseminated their scientific knowledge throughout time in a creative and different manner. So I think we can learn a lot from other cultures when it comes to ways in which knowledge has been translated, and that a lot of creativity potential still lies in there as well.
There was a question from Toss and then another one, yeah?
Look, I have a question for Massimiano. And my question is, Massimiano, you are the most creative science communicator I know. And I remember your speech at Florence where your theme was style. And do not drink cappuccino before after 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I remember the play that you did in Brazil and your writings on cooking as well. So what have you got to say about creativity and being a science communicator? Because you are one of the boundary breakers.
Thank you, Tos. I'm a bit embarrassed, but I think the concept of style, I think, is exactly about this. I think the reason why I'm interested in the concept of style is that it's a non-normative way of defining the canons of quality in an open way, in a way that connects science and art, because style, I mean, today we associate style with fashion, art, but of course it's about, you have style in science. There are wonderful books about styles of scientific thought. Alistair Crombie, wonderful book in the history of science. So this is my, I never taught it this way, but it's probably this is my own approach to science communication, why I found it interesting as a way of connecting different languages and different styles. And by the way, it's not a rule that you cannot drink cappuccino after 2 p.m. I mean, it's you can do whatever you want. It's just, we just find it weird, you know, just like, I'm sure it's the same reaction that maybe a Chinese craft masterpiece, when you show something that is done in a different way, you know, it's weird. You can do it, of course, but it's not the way it should be done. that is style, you know, that is style. Giorgio Armani used to say that elegance is not about being noticed, but about being remembered. So style is quality that lasts. And then, of course, it changes historically, as it should. Is it an answer? I don't think it's an answer.
I think it's a great example of what Hopeng was talking about earlier, asking about cultures. It's very different.
We have a question from our colleague over there. Tos, do you still have the microphone? No, or you gave it back? Okay. We still have 15 minutes, I think.
Thank you very much. So I'm Sujata Raman from the Australian National University. So I have a question. I wanted to bring up the UN right to science. So as many of you know, this is a right that has been enshrined in the Human Rights Declaration of the United Nations since 1946. Interestingly, there's been a lot of effort to try and interpret what it actually means. So is it a right to science that, where the public are simply there to kind of enjoy the benefits of science? Or is it something more substantial than that? And I just wanted to bring up an interpretation that the UN Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, Farida Shahid, she's a professor, an economic development sociologist, but has also really contributed to developing this idea of cultural rights. And her argument has been that actually the right to science is part of a more fundamental human right to creativity. And so therefore, we need to think about who has the right to do science and to be considered to be doing science and recognized as being doing science in a much kind of broader way. So she brings in, you know, creativity. She sort of looks at the interface between science and creativity. She sees that as a single thing. But part of, in doing so, she's essentially trying to expand our understanding, our definition of who counts as a scientist, you know, by using this creativity. So I guess I wanted to throw that back to the panel if anybody wanted to respond, because what does it then mean for, should we be asking these questions about not just scientists' ability to be creative in the current kind of era, but also are we kind of throwing open the gates of science in a way, and thinking about it more broadly, so beyond you know, what scientists do or people in the entertainment industry do, but much more broadly than that. So yeah, any reactions?
Thank you. I think it's a very good question for our panelists. The right to science, the right to creativity. How do we open the gate?
Can I?
Okay.
Yeah. I think I have very familiar with the right words recently mentioned in UN system. And I just came back from UNESCO for a meeting last month, and and I also involved in debates, let's say dialogue of UN initiate EU, European Union. They raised a dialogue on the principal values and collaboration principles between all of the countries. So we also mentioned the right and the freedom to get access to science. And I think because I was involved as a participants from China, so I would like to say what we think about this term or this conception, the right to science. And I think from a public aspect, there are two aspects get access to science. From the public rights to science, to enjoy the benefit, to understand the development, that's what Martin mentioned, the scientific literacy will solve the problem. And I think at the moment it's still a capability building issue, because if people want to get access to science and get understand and then make their own choice and decision to make right choice, they have to get more information, get more educate from the science and technology development. I think this is one direction. And the other aspect or other dimension of the right to science is for the science and technology professionals, let's say scientists. They have the freedom to collaboration, and they have freedom to doing their research, to find their funds and to get supported. So I think the government in almost every countries, they will provide this kind of regulations in the policy dimension to make their scientists to have the rights and freedom to conduct their research activities. And so far as I know, and there are a lot of memos and they have some outliers and from all kinds of countries and from international organizations also. They give a very good practice to show what people think about the right to science. It's really a very hard buzzword in the science policy making field recently, in recent 2 years. I'm very happy to exchange more with you later. Okay.
Last comment, we need to close. Who wants to? Michelle, yes.
I'll just say, coming back to the aesthetics and style and food critics and art critics, I remember Brian Trench talking about we don't have a science critic, that it's very difficult to speak back to science. And I think even all the opportunities we've got, it's very difficult for people to speak back to science in meaningful ways within your cultural context, within our cultural context. So I think that is still a challenge for us with all the resources we've got to help people engage as critics of science to meaningfully contribute.
Thank you. I think we should congratulate our speakers for such an interesting discussion, and thank you for being with us.